As Lara spoke, and before Lara, Gima, who are the pioneer interns, and I've seen Van Dyke, I've seen Kwabena. Somebody shocked me by saying she retired, Catherine, the pioneer staff of WACSI and the early program staff. I think at the end of this, I would also move a motion for retirement. And doing so with the full satisfaction that we have a worthy set of successors who have not only maintained the ship afloat, but have actually sailed into the blue seas far beyond what we may have imagined when this journey started. I see my sister Josephine Efa, whom many of you would probably know, one of the leading advocates of girls' power and rights in Nigeria. My colleague, friend, fellow traveler, Charles, but also William Awinado. I'll tell a bit of a story of the connection between WACSI and WACSOF, which William Awinado played an important role in helping to shape. In respects, this is a bit of a valedictory, I would say, for me, from that point of view. When WACSI was started in 2005, a lot of debates and discussions had taken place within the Open Society Foundation for West Africa, OSIWA, at a time when we were all very positive and hopeful about the transitions that were going on in West Africa, against the backdrop of many discontents. First and foremost, West Africa, as we all came to know it, was the coup d'etat belt of the African continent. Many more military takeovers in our sub-region in comparison to any other region of the continent. West Africa also with a reputation for an uncommon authoritarianism, perhaps only surpassed by the record of the likes of Idi Amin in East Africa. But across the sub-region, the whole notion of strong men in power was one which was also fairly embedded in most of the countries. The space, as it were, for citizen activism was itself extremely narrow. And at least until the 1990s, when there was what I referred to in a piece I did at the time as a renaissance in civil society activism in the course of the 1990s, including here in Nigeria, where after a period, a lull in civic organization and the failure of the military effectively to repress all opposition, a very creative set of people led by the likes of Olisa Agbakoba and Clement Wangwo came to the scene, and the late Innocent Chukuma was part of the what I call the young Turks of that period, came to the scene in a very intelligent manner to take on the military. And taking on Abacha was not a joke, to take on the military, but to do so from a civil liberties point of view and a litigation approach. A litigation approach which simultaneously challenged the judiciary to at least live up to some of the most elementary aspects of its role in any political system. But otherwise, across the sub-region, it was also a season of anomy for civil society leading into the 1990s. And on top of it, of course, we were all reeling from the consequences of structural adjustment, of that combination of austerity measures that the IMF and the World Bank preferred and imposed as the solution to the African crisis, and which effectively led to a series of fractures and dislocations in society and in the relationship between state and society in much of West Africa, including even the capacity of the state itself in the context of an attempt to downsize or so-called right-size it to be more supportive of a market liberalization agenda. The question at the time was, how do we begin in the context of the changes that were unfolding to consolidate a civil society sector in West Africa that will not only accompany the journey of renewal, but also become perhaps a lightning rod for transformation of a forward-looking nature. Now, it wasn't an easy question to answer because, again, we often said, at least in the context of Nigeria and Ghana, that civic forces, civilian opposition, civilian discontent may be strong and effective enough to bring about a military coup to take place. When we say we make the country ungovernable, trade unions, student unions, National Union of Ghana students, National Union of Nigerian students, taking to the street for days and bringing down a military government and provoking a coup in the process, but never effectively strong enough to stamp their own agenda on the political space as to create an alternative vision of society. And in that process, we found ourselves in that cycle of repeated coups. We were strong enough to bring down an authoritarian regime, but never strong enough to claim power. And opportunistic forces within the armed forces itself were always on the lookout for the signs of discontent that could be used to justify a new set of military rulers coming in. And therefore, the question was, how do we overcome this problem, this gap in our experiences, in a way that will help us to begin to redress the imbalances in the political context of West Africa? And that was one dimension. The second was the idea of recreating somehow, in whatever form it will be possible, a pan-West African solidarity. A pan-West African solidarity which once existed in this sub-region and was in fact an important part of the struggle for independence of our countries across West Africa. Many may not remember, but there used to be something called the West African Students' Union, WACSI, which effectively played a role in the post-war period in supporting the nationalist politicians that underwrote or led the struggle for independence across the entire sub-region. And what was true for the English-speaking countries of West Africa was also true for the Francophone, French-speaking countries of West Africa, where around the notion of présence africaine, they were able, in fact, to create networks of solidarity from country to country that made it possible for the countries of the region to attain their independence. Soon after that independence was won, country after country, we also saw a dissolution and fragmentation of West African solidarity. And if we operated from the point of view that democracy, just like peace, is indivisible, and we had enough lessons to show the indivisibility of democracy in West Africa, in the sense that whenever you heard the siren or the martial music play in Ghana, you knew it was only a matter of time for martial music to start playing in Nigeria. And that notion of indivisibility of democracy was one which we thought was important to bring back to the table. That a threat to democracy in Ghana has to be seen and understood by civic forces and even political society in other places in West Africa as a threat to democracy at home. The contagious effect of a collapse of democratic order is one which sometimes I think we take for granted, but our history has shown that it is a real part of the experience. And over and above that was the benefit that could emanate from simply networking a new generation of civic leaders. It was okay to be effective and functional within your country, but ultimately, your bulwark of support might actually also come from leaders of civic organizations outside of your immediate geographical boundary. And being able to build that network of support across a West African sub-region was also seen as an important element. And so the motivation for the creation of WACSI was an impeccable one, historically grounded, responded to important needs of the times, and also was going to fill critical gaps that had built up over the years in our ability to do cross-border work. And as with every good initiative that we have, the big problem was the money. We had to find the money to meet and match our ambitions for a pan-West African resource, such as WACSI. OSIWA was generous in partly underwriting some of the initial costs, setup costs in Accra, and some program money. And I guess OSIWA continues to give some degree of support to WACSI. Well, I would like to say that perhaps the single most important factor in the success of WACSI, and which might also be an important lesson for civil society across West Africa, has been the single-minded focus and dedication of the staff of WACSI. You really couldn't hope for a more dedicated team of people than those who got recruited into various positions at WACSI. I was telling Nana earlier in the day, as I saw different people and whom I'd known from my time as on the board of the Institute, that it is remarkable that people have stayed with WACSI. You know, my friend Van Dyke, Omolara, Kwabena, and others have all stayed with the institution, not because they were being paid the highest imaginable salaries. In fact, I can let you into a secret that there were precarious moments when we could not even afford as a board to pay the staff, but they stayed. And together with the leadership, and here really I would like to pay tribute to you, Nana, found really very creative ways to begin to generate income, not just depending on WACSI. We fought battles with WACSI, with OSIWA, on the funding of WACSI. This is an important resource. It's doing a great job. Why don't we increase money to the organization? By the time I was leaving the board, actually, there was already a threat that even the amount that was guaranteed of maybe $500,000 or so, I can't remember the exact figures, was going to be cut down to 300. And you should begin to find a way to exit support from OSIWA. And it was thanks to leadership and the dedication of the staff that alternative methods of financing the work of WACSI was developed. And here we are today, not only celebrating the survival of the institution, but also its expansion and outreach. In a sense, also the fulfillment of an aspect of the dreams that we had at the founding of WACSI, namely that it would not only be a pan-African, a pan-West African organization in name, but would organize and make its presence felt all across the West African sub-region. And I recall that activities were held in Guinea, events were hosted outside of Accra, here in Nigeria, And this office, this node that we are opening here in Abuja, I think is an important step forward, which I would like also to celebrate and applaud alongside all of those who have partnered with you. We are, of course, as chair of the occasion indicated, in very perilous times in West Africa. West African democracy, the story of that democratic process cannot be fully written without reference to the role which civil society played. After all, the national conference movement that developed in Benin Republic in the beginning of the 1990s, 89 to 90, which sustained a mass participation over a prolonged period of time, almost a year and a half, of an entire process of a search for a renewal, and which spread across the sub-region, was in fact underwritten by organized civic groups, including trade unions, but also students and other actors, lawyers, media, personalities and groups, and the like. And at this point where we begin to see a dissipation of energies around the democratic project, in the context also of the resurgence of military governance and military rule on the continent, particularly in West Africa, and the bad news that we have not seen the last attempt by the military to make a comeback. Some courageous pundits have actually listed 3 countries that are prime candidates in West Africa for the next coup d'etats that we can expect. I'm not that courageous, so I'm not going to name them. But partly because also I nurse a hope and a prayer that this will not happen. Because if it were to happen, the consequences, I think, would be too enormous to contemplate. But nevertheless, it seems to me that it's an invitation once again to us who work in the civic arena of civil society to gird its loins once again and take to the front lines in defense of democracy, both as ideal and also as an idea in the governance of West Africa, for many, many good reasons, not least because we have also seen what authoritarianism at its best, quote unquote, can achieve and deliver. And it hasn't been very good for the sub-region. There once was a time when people would talk about the good coup and the bad coup. But the truth of the matter is that when you begin to have the incursion of the military into the arena of governance, it is extremely difficult to say what is good and what is not good about a coup d'etat. And the fact that elected government may have underperformed in ways that are sometimes very disappointing and shocking to us cannot be the simple justification, as some voices have tended to do, to say that maybe the time has come for the military to return to the arena of governance. And I think that message of the fact of a call to society in general that the alternative to a bad elected government is a better elected government, not a military intervention, is one that needs to go out strongly and powerfully. And we in civil society have a role to play in that. To do so also requires rebuilding our political instincts, in a manner that will repoliticize civil society, not in the sense of partisan politics, but more in terms of being organized around a political project which I suggest in this instance, given the context, will be a project of the defense and advancement of democracy. That, it seems to me, is the most important call and project of the moment. And so the work which you do in WACSI, and which you've done so very well, of building civil society capacity, it seems to me also needs, at this point in time, to move one notch further into that arena of repoliticization of civil society in West Africa, building a political consciousness across the West African sub-region that enables civil society to be a rule setter for the practice of democracy in West Africa. And in so doing, to also not simply content itself with being the watchdog, but as and when necessary, to also be in the driver's seat, in a context where we have seen that political leadership, political society, those who lead political parties in the West African sub-region have shown that they are not short of an appetite for the dangerous and the irresponsible, right? Political leadership of a reckless kind, which basically wastes society on the assumption that there is no alternative to it, and therefore it is entitled to behave the way it likes. And being able to call that the bluff of that political society constitutes for me an important element of the repoliticization that must take place. We do not have wax off in the way in which His Excellency Awinado and Dr. Chambers envisaged it when they created the West Africa Civil Society Forum. That was, in a sense, partly to play a role of a more political nature than WACSI, in the way we thought of the division of labor between the two institutions. And perhaps if WACSOF, I don't know, I've not heard about WACSOF in a while, still exists in any form within ECOWAS or outside of ECOWAS, now also will be an opportunity with the Abuja node to build a much closer collaboration between the two, of a kind that will also lead the narratives about the challenges of democratization in West Africa. On those challenges, I am sure that all of us can agree. What are the discontents? What are the difficulties? What are the areas that require improvement? What has worked? What has not worked well? And so on and so forth. But more than that is to translate those discontents into a powerful narrative of West African democratization that will effectively become the dominant frame of reference around which we try to reorganize a renewal of democracy in West Africa. No political system endures forever, but those that endure for a very long time do so only because leadership is able at the right moment to find the points of fatigue and to seek the entry points of renewal of that system. We have mobilized the youth. The youth have, you mentioned JACPA as one of the options, and I'm sure JACPA will exhaust itself very soon, and we will still be stuck here with the same problems. That ultimately, being able to offer a new bargain may be the most important element of a change in narrative and a renewal of conversations. What is going to be the bargain 10 years down the line in living in West Africa under an elected government? At present, I think we can answer it mostly in the negative, that there is really not much. States are unable to secure citizens on account of the failure to provide elementary security the very military forces who should be providing that security are blaming elected government and taking power. We've seen the first limits of that approach in Burkina Faso with the decision of the captains to say that, well, we asked the colonels to improve security, they failed, so we, the captains, are taking over. And if the logic continues, sergeants may take over from captains to say, well, we thought the captains could do it, and now we, the sergeants, are taking over. It's clearly a dead end that we are dealing with. And what we seem to be requiring is not only a refoundation of the state, but also a refoundation of the bargain between state and society. Of that, in the classic political science construct, that social contract between state and society. What is it about being a West African? And what is the bargain that we have benefiting from our membership of the West African political community, and what do we give back to West Africa in terms of our responsibilities for the sub-region? And it is here, I think, that your work is cut out for you as an agenda for the medium to the long term, to begin to convene as part of that repoliticization leaders of civil society on the terms of WACSI, but hopefully if there's a WACSOF still active, with WACSOF participating, to say that from country to country, what must constitute a new social contract in West Africa. Because at the point of independence, we were clear what the social contract was. We knew what the bargain of independence was all about. When the journey of re-democratization started in the 1990s, we were also clear to a great extent what we expected of the new democratic dispensation. As the director of, I think it was Baobab, mentioned, we saw glimpses of what was possible, but very quickly we began to see a relapse in the process to a point where today the discontents appear to overwhelm any of the benefits of what a bargain may have brought to the table. How do we reinvent that bargain as a basis for the renewal of democratic governance in West Africa? And if we are able to contribute that, in addition to what we do in capacitating and networking the next generation leadership of civil society in West Africa, I think we would have put the icing on the cake as an institution and fully fulfilled our calling and mandate to help West Africa to overcome its crisis of leadership and development. I've always taken the view, I've had the opportunity to travel, like many of you here would probably have done also, across our continent. And I'm fairly convinced that Africa will probably not turn the table of underdevelopment until West Africa gets it right. Because in every respect, this is the powerhouse of dynamism. It is the powerhouse of creativity. It is the powerhouse of energy, of a kind which you do not see, at least on the same scale and with the same vigor, in other parts of the continent. I'm not even going to talk about Cameroon, Gima, but if as the single longest serving leader in the world, 42 years, and he's running for another term of office, and he's in his 80s, officially. So you can see the kinds of crises that we are dealing with across the continent, and for which the battle for West Africa is particularly important. It's a battle which has been joined already. It has been joined already, as Charles Abani indicated earlier on, from many perspectives. Internally, of course, there are enemies of democracy that have organized themselves and taken up arms with an alternative vision of society They may be clothed and hide behind a notion of Islam, but it is a contested and peculiar notion of Islam that they have taken to the fore as part of an organization against the open, secular, and democratic society. Move from that to the other extreme in the context of a new Cold War and a new scramble for Africa. West Africa is the prize. Whether you look at it in terms of resources, in terms of population, everybody has a stake and a presence in West Africa today, from the big powers to the middle powers, right? Dubai, the Emirates, Qatar, Turkey are all investing massively across the West African sub-region. We celebrate the fact that Turkish Airline flies to every West African country today as probably an achievement, but it is actually part of a strategy. And Turkey is very clear about positioning itself in the same way as a middle power like Morocco is also very vigorously investing and positioning, not innocently, not for nothing, but as part of a wider struggle for the soul of our sub-region, which we must be awake to, and which requires that we retool ourselves on an ongoing basis, retooling ourselves in order to be able also to read the geopolitics of the challenges that confront us and how to manage the geopolitics in a way that does not set us back indefinitely. And so I look very much forward to the work which will be done out of the node in Abuja. And congratulations, Lara, that you are the lead on this initiative. You have a good knowledge of the terrain here in Nigeria. Nana was very diplomatic when she said that from her first outing in Abuja and her return, she hadn't seen too much of a transformation in the civil society sector in Nigeria. Some good things have happened. Some very good things actually have happened. And it's been delightful to see a new generation of people beyond the Olisa Agbakobas, beyond the Clement Nwankwas, Ayo Obe, and others who have come to the fore and are fighting important battles at different levels. But it is also important that civil society in Nigeria must not replicate the divisions in political society, especially divisions of an ethno-regional nature. Because that problem, that crisis that has hobbled Nigerian political society from being able to call what is right, right, and what is wrong, wrong, and of people hiding behind all kinds of sentiments, and refusing to condemn a corrupt leader or an incompetent leader for what he or she may be. Well, they are mostly he, right? For what he is, and demanding accountability of the kind. It's only civil society that can do so, and do so on the basis of clearly defined criteria that do not accommodate the parochial sentiments that you can even forgive political society from engaging in. And I hope that this node will be a healing balm, as it were, for West Africa, for Nigerian civil society, a healing balm that will help it to rediscover a national project within a broader West African project, a national project that will be organized around the fact that Nigeria must remain a united country, that Nigeria must remain a democratic country, that Nigeria must also live up to its historic responsibility, to its citizens and to peoples of African descent around the world, and that we have no choice about it. Because as the historian Jacob Adebayo said in a little cited and known essay, but perhaps one of his most powerful, the problem with thinking of anything outside of a united Nigeria is precisely that you don't even know where to begin to break it up. It's simply impossible. The intertwining nature of so many histories and sociologies and ethnographies in this country make it impossible to contemplate. And Nigeria cannot be a burden on West Africa and Central Africa on account of its own inability to get its house in order. WACSI has a role to help at least conscientize civil society and public opinion in this regard. And with these words, I would like to thank you for your kind attention. I would not say welcome to Nigeria, as some have said, you've always been in Nigeria. Welcome to the next level of your presence in Nigeria, and good luck with your project. Thank you.